Greetings, all you wonderful people, you time travellers. Before I launch into my weekly monologue, my thought for the week, I just want to give you a quick reminder to check out my patreon.com site. By joining up and parting with the necessary small sum of cash, about the price of a cup of coffee, to be honest, you can show your financial support for this channel, and you get, as a quid pro quo, you get early access to the new stuff. You get access to an exclusive question and answer session every week. It's great, and it would be even better if you were there. Okay, get along and join up. That's the advert over. Now for the weekly rant. I have to say, looking out at the aftermath of the general election in the UK and the continuing tribulations on account of elections across Europe, well, it's impossible to not comment on that, I think. And to be honest with you, it's like the Walking Dead out there in politics land. It's the resurrection shuffle for people we thought we'd seen the back of. So many characters in Britain that we thought we'd seen the last of, excised from public life and laid in, well, metaphorical graves dug by their own failure and, well, frank unpopularity, really. But they're back. God help us. Former Labour Home Secretary Jackie Smith, who I'd actually forgotten about. I had genuinely forgot that she existed until her face cropped up again. And she's back in power via the House of Lords. That's that sleazy route taken by the politically undead. The likes of David Cameron, those who know that they're too despised ever to win a seat again in the usual way. So slithering into power by first donning the fabled ermine, the fur of the Lords. Let's remember, Smith was among the hordes of MPs disgraced by the expenses scandal in 2009. You remember that? The duck houses and clearing of castle moats all on the taxpayers' dime. Remember that disgrace? Well, it was survivable, clearly. Smith's undoing at the time, it centred on her claiming that a room in her sister's house in London was her main home, so that she could help herself to thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money for the upkeep of a house in Redditch, where she actually lived most of the time. There's various things. She claimed ATP for a bath plug. Remember that? Well, she went out of office then, but she's back now, big as life, with a big new job in Parliament, big new job in government. David Cameron, he just, to contextualise it in a way, he used the Lordship's back alley to make it to Foreign Secretary in the similarly unelected Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Tory government, the one just passed. So now Smith is similarly ennobled so as to become Labour's higher education minister in the Star-Margeddon that's presently before our tired, glassy, yet still angry eyes. Douglas Alexander is back too. I'll be impressed if anybody remembers him. Non-entity that he was and is. A career politician of the First Order. Did nothing in his life really except suck up to Gordon Brown for a decade, or however long it was he lasted. Well, he's business minister, apparently. Ed Miliband, remember that face? That gurning mess as he tried and almost failed to eat a bacon sandwich unassisted in 2014. So capable or not of completing the sort of simple tasks that are usually mastered confidently by toddlers, he's back in office. He's Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. There's a mouthful, bigger than a bacon sandwich, which is to say he's been given a bigger loudhailer with which to chant the lie that is the climate hoax, which is the greatest hoax of all time. As part of Star-Margeddon, the ban on onshore wind farms is already lifted, so we can look forward to more proliferation of those abominations, those blights on the landscape that are the antithesis of anything green in any heartfelt, sincere sense of the word. Because to make wind turbines, well, you depend on hydrocarbons, oil and gas, in foreign climes, not here, and their siting in the landscape requires the wholesale sterilisation of wildlife, every living thing trapped and boxed up and moved away. And for as long as they stand, blades turning, they harvest birds in uncounted numbers that pile up as little corpses at their bases. Those bases are vast plugs of cement, one of the most, if not the most, ungreen substances in existence. And at the end of their lives, the turbines can't be recycled because of the way they're made and what they're made of, and so they're buried in gigantic landfill sites. This is the kind of project Ed Miliband loudly approves, along with solar panels that contain lead and cadmium and other toxins, lethal toxins, that must leak into the soil and then the water table once they are decommissioned and landfilled alongside the relic wind turbines. Net zero, of which it's all a part, net zero, Agenda 2030, has been described as the longest suicide note for the world. But it's worse than that, because rather than suicide, it's premeditated murder for hundreds of millions, if not billions, of the world's poorest people. That's what these people stand for and champion. And when the baddies take away the accessible, cheap energy that is oil and coal and gas, when they take away the oil-based fertilisers that are the only thing that make it possible to feed 8 billion people all at once, when they let loose the horsemen of the apocalypse, hunger, pestilence, war, death, then the billions will surely die for want of peace and safety, for want of energy, for want of food. So as I say, it's the walking dead out there seeking to rule our lives. The walking dead that will lead a parade of billions towards final death if we let them. But more than that, beyond the sort of low budget horror flick element of it all, the return to power of the worst at the worst of times, all of this tells us something else as well. Probably something more important. Obviously, it tells us that voting in elections in the traditional way is properly meaningless. I mean, don't get me wrong, I voted, which is to say, I walked into a polling station and I made a mark on a bit of paper. And I knew as I was doing it that it was some sort of hopeless compulsion that was really just about declaring that I was still alive. That still existed, Don't think it would do anything. I knew it wouldn't do anything. So it was a vote for old time's sake. It was like a last muttered hurrah for a dying system, a dead system. But we can see, and indeed we've been shown, we've had our noses rubbed in the fact that voting makes less than no difference. You just look around Europe. It's not just the UK. The UK is at fault in a kind of uniquely special, anachronistic way. But if you look around Europe, it's broadly the same effect. Geert Wilders, he won popular support in the Netherlands, but to no avail. Any hopes of sort of populist leadership there are dead in the water. In France, Emmanuel Macron is still in place, unflushable. Germany, Scholz, still in place, likewise. Because people in their desperation, and in good faith, many of them, try to vote for something new and nothing new happens. They just get more of the same. It's abusive, the relationship that most people have now with the system. In Britain, a third, more or less, of the vote gave Starmer a landslide. He got a third of the votes cast and a lion's share of the seats in Parliament. He attracted less interest in voting Labour than Jeremy Corbyn did. When Corbyn lost his election in 2019, Starmer's got less of the vote, but a huge majority. Such is the nonsense of the first past the post system that we're lumbered with here. I mean, it was no endorsement of Labour. It was a slap in the face for the Tories. It was only national anger at the outgoing Tory party that Labour achieved this landslide. It just kind of washed up. It just kind of washed up on the beach, flaccid and undead, but with a massive majority. You know, whatever happened and why, and the statisticians are all over it, but what was plain to see is that electorates are not taken remotely seriously by those clinging on to power. Those faceless, nameless figures that make the real decisions and pull the strings of the puppets on the public stage. Starmer and the rest of them, they're empty sock puppets. There's real power behind them, whose names we do not know, whose faces we are not invited to look upon. But they don't, those entities, they don't take us seriously. And by now we can see how little those elites think of us. Look at the calibre of the puppets they dangle before us. Feel the naked, dripping contempt that we're treated with now. Watching Sir Keir Starmer fill his cabinet is like the 3 a.m. bin rake in a nightclub. When the lights are on and the last song is winding down. And at a time like that, in a place like that, anyone will do. The 3 a.m. bin rake. He's already been in Washington, offering obeisance to the senile wreck that is President Joe Biden. And he's been mouthing somebody else's words about strengthening the NATO alliance, committing more money to it. This is a man who doesn't know what a woman is, or at least won't say it. Now waiting to be told what to say about Ukraine and the perpetual tinderbox that is the Middle East. Sabres are rattling all around the West, and weak placemen like Starmer dance helplessly to the tune of it, strings pulled. David Lammy as Foreign Secretary, God help us all. Lammy's already been flitting around the EU, talking of a reset. Yes, indeed, that's the word. That's the choice of word, a reset, which means finding ways to collude with unwanted politicians elsewhere, more of the politically undead, as they seek to pretend that the real people of their respective countries don't actually exist, or if they do, that they must be simply dismissed as far-right extremists and fascists. An especially choice moment for me, I thought, was when we were invited to look on, helpless and hopeless, as King Charles, whose friend and mentor was Sir Jimmy Savile. And he handed the keys of 10 Downing Street to Sir Keir Starmer, who was Director of Public Prosecutions when that entity failed to charge Savile for his appalling crimes. What a moment that was. Elections are just bread and circuses. We know this, right enough. But the bread is stale and too many people have had enough of circuses. The same old tricks, the same old tools, the same old clowns are all that's available to the undead. War, famine, sickness, death. It's all they have. It's all they have, and even they know, absolutely know, that they're operating in plain view now. There's no disguise, no mask anymore. The distractions aren't distracting anymore. Too many of us know that what we're being invited to look at is just smoke and mirrors. And this is what you've got to pay attention to, the smoke and mirrors, only in as much as that's where you shouldn't be looking. The most obvious smoke and mirrors are those in benighted Ukraine. The war that keeps on giving to the rich while taking everything, including life itself, from the ordinary people, before casting them into shallow graves, young women included. Too many now know Ukraine for what it always was, which is a money laundering scheme. It was never about democracy, for in Ukraine there is no democracy. Zelensky has outlasted his presidential term, and he's still there. banning elections. Ukraine is about protecting the investments of the Western uber-rich. The usual suspects that grew fatter on Iraqi oil after that war, that's ExxonMobil, Halliburton, Chevron, and the same companies have already staked their claim on Ukraine's reserves of oil. And massive transnational corporations and financiers like BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they're there too, rubbing their hands together at the thought of all the filthy lucre made available by Volodymyr Zelensky's enthusiasm for privatising and selling off his own country. When all else fails, they take you to war. I keep saying it. It's not my line. I'm repeating it. What matters much, much more is that by now, heightened, sharpened by those farcical elections in Europe and in the UK, and before whatever happens in the United States of America in November, everyone else with any sense knows it and says it too.